So let me ask you this. So, do you now understand comparisons even a little bit more than you did this morning at the beginning of the day? Good. Okay, so you're beginning to get some experience with comparisons, and I know we've gone through this very quickly. In many trainings, this component is left out altogether. It's one of the few places where you can even get training on dealing with comparisons, and I think it's a very important piece to acquire. And I realize that I haven't spent enough time on it with you to fully get everything about it. So consider yourselves introduced to the subject. Now, now, let me give you also a few more examples that I think could be useful also. So last year, I believe it was, there was a woman in the training whose experience was, I feel bad because I'm just not as good as I could be. I'm not as good as I could be. Nothing new, is it, right? She's not the only one in the whole world that has this, is she? So, so what comparison is this? Yes, that applies to all languages. It's true. So what kind of comparison is she making here? Other, self-other? Self-self. Yeah, she says, I'm not as good as I could be. So I ask, well, how do you know that? And she's not saying, well, so-and-so does something and I can't. She says, well, I just know that I could be really resourceful and creative and flexible and amazing, and I'm not that way. So she's got this image in front of her of a wonderful desired self-image, which is a great thing to have, right? And yet, she's comparing herself with it in a way to make herself feel bad. So, yeah, it can happen. Okay, so with this particular comparison, let's play with this one. So I'm not as good as I could be. So what would be a potential component way to change this comparison? Okay, now that's going for a counterexample. So, and it is changing the time frame of the comparison. So when is a time when you have been that good? If I role play her, she had such an impossible desired self-image that I think she still would have said, no, I've never been that good. Exactly, it's like Superwoman out there. So what I actually said to her, that I did several of them, but the one that made the most difference for her is, so in what ways are you right now already as good as that desired self-image? So, which is what? It's chunking and or framing, frame size, and what else? Yeah, I think you said it, Diane. Yes, match, mismatch, or mismatch, match. Mash. So after a while doing language patterns, it all turns to mash. I know you've never had that experience, but oh well, I'm just not competent yet compared to you guys. So mismatch and match. And so she started out, I'm not as good as. In what ways are you already as good as your desired self-image? And that shifted it for her. And then having gotten this shift, then I went on to work with the rest of her limitation in the sense that, so now, how does recognizing the ways in which you're already as good as your desired self-image allow you to learn even more from this image to get better and better at the things that you're doing? And she said that worked as well for her because previously, she just went into feeling bad, and now recognizing ways in which she's already as good as that makes her more curious and resourceful as she's examining what else she can pick up. So there's an example. Another example that came up in here, somebody had the belief that when I train with my partner, people's perception is that my partner is better than me because he talks so much more than I do. And so he's just talking. And I don't talk nearly as much. And so I think that people in the room, even though I don't think he's better than I am, I think that people in the room get that impression because he's always jumping in there and answering their questions right away, and I don't say nearly as much. So now, first of all, again, in terms of other, self, what kind of comparison is this? It's an interesting one, isn't it? It's other, yes. And the way in which it's other is, it's other people's perceptions of one person and other people's perceptions of me, right? So it's other in that sense. And so I had the advantage of not being in the exercise, so I kind of let this mull around in my mind while I was walking around the room for a few minutes and came back to it. And I asked her, so is it possible that the people in the room's perception of themselves is better when they're listening to you as compared to when they're listening to your partner? And initially her response was, well, I don't know, I'm not going to mind read kind of thing. However, her original belief was a mind reading already. We always make up stuff that other people are thinking and feeling, don't we, really? We have our own conclusions and assumptions that we make. And so I wanted to invite her to have the possibility of perceiving others as having a different experience than she had started out with. So then I asked her, so I know that you don't really know this. However, can you imagine if you were going to guess at people's experience, because she's already guessing anyway, if you were going to guess at people's experience, in what way is it better when they're listening to you as compared to when they're listening to your partner? And she said, well, my partner talks so quickly that people don't have time to think and process things, so that might confuse them. So I asked her, so is it the case then, or could it be the case, that people's perception of themselves includes more self-confidence and resourcefulness when they're listening to you as compared to when they're listening to your partner? And this got the shift. So it took a few steps along the way of going for, we're going for really a different other comparison. It's still other. And the reason I'm doing that, I'm sticking with other, because my assumption is that in the context, even if in our work I say, well, what's it like when you think about comparing yourself to others or self or whatever, when she's in that context, there's nothing necessarily to stop her from thinking about the other people's perceptions. So I want to give her more choice in how she thinks about other people's perceptions. Yes?
Similar case happened to me. I trained with a colleague and she speaks so quickly and she moves. I am the contrary. I speak so quietly and I don't move as much. And I felt so bad about myself because I thought that she got the attention of everybody in the room. And I felt this feeling until the seminar was over, and a lot of people came to me and they just told me the same two words that you said. When we listen to you, we feel more resourceful and more confident than when we listen to her. And I can, wow!
Yeah. So it's great to get that feedback, isn't it? Yeah. So, and this example, by the way, having had this experience, it's a wonderful metaphor to tell someone. If I had had the same experience and delivered it in that way, I think it could have been even more effective than the way that I delivered it, because that personal experience bit is a wonderful context in which to...
I felt like we say in Arabic, I want the earth to open and swallow me.
Yeah.
Just to disappear.
We say that in English too, actually.
Yes, same here.
But after that, everybody rushing to me and they left her and they said, we feel more attached to you, more confident. We listen you are more resourceful than them.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you for this example. And what a wonderful context, to use one's own personal experience to deliver the pattern. Excellent. Okay, so now, having taken the time to cut up all the vegetables, put them in the bowls, ready to be mixed up together, now we get to go for the soup. And so we get to find out what happens when we just go for it, go for the change, using all of the patterns that you've learned. Or when I say all of the patterns, what I mean is any of them, whichever one fits for the situation. So, one or ones. Let's turn back a little here. It's easiest in some ways just to go for it, isn't it? Rather than to arbitrarily stick to one choice. So you've already done the most difficult part, which is sticking to just one piece at a time. Now, with the freedom and flexibility to use all the choices, and nobody's going to come around and say, nope, that's not the pattern. Do that instead. So it's going to allow you the optimal flexibility for going for a change. So to demonstrate this, now who has a limitation you'd like to explore? And in the realm of things, if there's a 1 to 10 scale in terms of intensity, I would rather go for around a 4-ish, 4, maybe 5, something like that. So it doesn't have to be just, I want to floss my teeth. However, I don't want major life issues either. And if it seems too big, there might be a piece of it that we can do. So let me ask what it is first. I want to pick something that I think will be good for a demonstration.
My friend Nick, he's just an amazing communicator. Like, he's incredible. He's always on the fly as far as his sense of humor is concerned. Like, he's got a very crude sense of humor, but he can say something like really crude to someone and they'll still laugh at it. Whereas if I try to pull it off, he'd probably slap me or something like that.
Okay.
So yeah.
So your friend Nick has a sense of humor that people laugh at, and your belief is if I did the same thing, people would slap you.
Well, my belief is that I'm not as good as he is. I'm not as fluent as a communicator as he is.
You're not as fluent as a communicator as Nick is.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no training to boot.
He has no training.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
Is a gift that one has. I can use the same, thing that I don't deliver the information
As effectively.
effectively like Quadra or
Okay.
I saw it.
Without getting into this.
I got it.
Without getting into this particular content yet, so what I want to do now is to find out what other limitations are available to potentially work with as a demonstration, because I want to choose some kind of demonstration that I think will be optimal for this purpose. What was that?
Tamara has a really good one.
I'll tell you, sometimes I feel incompetent compared with my colleagues.
You sometimes feel incompetent compared with your
like
colleagues?
Empty, like I don't know what to do next. Like, oh, you are no good.
Okay. All right. I think I'm going to go, since you've been up in the front of the room so much, I'm going to go with Anwar here. So, okay. And so go ahead and have a seat. Okay. Change of perception up here. Okay. So again, let me know what your belief is, your limitation, as you perceive it now.
It's sometimes, not always. I feel like I'm not able to take action or take a step. I feel like I am unresourceful to do things. Like I always imagine that my colleagues are better
Okay, so imagining that your colleagues are better than you in a lot of things has stopped you from taking action.
It doesn't stop me, just the feeling comes to me, feeling of emptiness, of not knowing
Okay.
what to do.
Okay, so imagining your colleagues are better at it than you gives you a sense of emptiness and not knowing. Okay, now, so let's start out with the comparison then. So just an aside to you, we'll start out with the comparison here. So in what ways do you already imagine yourself better than your colleagues?
In many ways.
Many ways. Okay, great. So how does knowing that you're already better than your colleagues in many ways, how does this affect your feeling?
Yeah, I feel it. It's there is something that is still here.
Something's
I want
still
to
there.
shift it up to make it equal with
Okay.
all,
Okay.
with who I am.
Okay, so you want to shift your experience to perceive yourself equal with who you are, would you say?
I hate this feeling.
Okay, so when you say there's something still here, what is it that, how is it that you manage to stop yourself from already perceiving yourself equal with who you are?
It is just a feeling with a voice
Mm-hmm.
that you are incompetent or you are empty.
Okay.
And it goes.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't, sometimes stays longer.
Okay, so the voice is you are incompetent or you are empty. And check with this voice. Since she's given me a voice already, I might as well go with it, right? So check with this voice. How do you know that I am incompetent or empty? What lets you know that?
There is no tangible example. It's just a feeling. Just a
Mhm.
feeling.
Okay, so you're not aware of a tangible example at this point in time. Now, so what I'd like you to do is to, first of all, ask this voice, is it just that you're guessing that I'm incompetent, or is there something that you're going by to conclude this?
I think it's both. It's guessing and
Okay, so when's the last time you had this experience happen?
believe it or not, just 2 hours ago.
2 hours ago. Okay.
But I didn't compare myself with my colleagues here.
Mhm.
I compared myself with my colleagues back home.
Oh, okay.
I don't know what brought this idea.
Okay, so a couple hours ago, you were comparing yourself with your colleagues back home, and in the course of this comparison, this voice at least, decided that you were incompetent. Okay, now, so interestingly enough, a minute ago, she said she was very aware of ways in which she's already more competent than her colleagues. And yet, so we get to the parts model. You know, on a conscious level, she knows she's competent, and yet there's this part of her that doesn't yet fully realize it. So what I'd like you to do is to check inside with this part of you and ask on the inside, so how is it possible that you can conclude that I'm incompetent compared to my colleagues? What stops you from fully accepting and realizing and appreciating my competence?
It's a feeling of stuckness.
Mm-hmm.
That I feel stuck
Okay.
sometimes.
All right. So there's a feeling of stuckness. And check inside for what is it that causes the stuckness?
It's just a feeling of inferiority in a way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So now this might not make any sense, but check on the inside. Is it really that I'm inferior with these colleagues, or is there something else I'm inferior to? Only with your colleagues. Okay. So ask this part of you now, if you were to be fully aware of the ways in which I am actually more competent than my colleagues, how does this change your perception? Uh-huh. Okay, it did change already. Great. And check with this part of you and ask, are you willing to remind me every time I might forget how competent I am? Are you willing to remind me of the many ways in which I'm already as competent as my colleagues, or even more so? Okay, great. And so, so check inside and again, ask this part of you. So, are there other ways that you would like to appreciate my competence in addition to noticing how I compare favorably with my colleagues? Okay, great. All right, now having had this experience of not only on a conscious level, but also on an unconscious level, really letting yourself experience fully your competence in relationship to your colleagues, is there anything that you're aware of now that can possibly stop you from just automatically having this response in those situations of learning or situations of using your skills? You think you will?
Yeah.
Will what?
This is the first idea that comes to me
Mhm.
when I feel competent.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Okay, great. So you think you will feel competent then? Terrific. Okay. Now, so now that you already have, and when I say you, of course, I'm talking not only to you consciously, but you as a whole person. So now that you already have this appreciation of your skills and abilities and competence, in what way will you still want to notice those little differences in which your colleagues may have learned something before you have? Okay, now that you already have this way of appreciating your competence fully, in what situations will you still want to notice little ways in which your colleagues have learned something before you have? Within this frame of understanding your competence, how does it change times when your colleagues really have mastered a skill that you are continuing to work on?
No, I don't understand what you mean.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. That's okay. So I'll just phrase it another way then. So having now this framework of understanding your competence in the big picture, so to speak. So in what way will it be useful to you to notice ways in which your colleagues are ahead of you on some particular skill, allowing you to then learn from them resourcefully?
Yeah, I think it's feeling of appreciation,
Mm-hmm.
feeling of I would have a resource where
Mhm.
I could go to
Mm-hmm.
have more resources.
Great. So now that you understand how competent you are, and you fully, not just consciously, you have a resourceful way of looking at your colleagues as a source of learning as well.
Yes.
Okay, great.
And addition to my learning.
Excellent. Okay, terrific. So now, when you've had this experience of fully appreciating your own competence while noticing ways in which you can also learn from others, how will this allow your own competence to continually improve day after day and year after year without even any endpoint of, finally getting all of it, but rather continually improving on and on.
Yeah, I will.
Great. Okay. So what is your experience like now in terms of your sense of your own skills and your own competence? Okay. Thank you. And stay here for a minute. And I'm happy to give you a hug, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, please stay for a moment. Okay, so before she takes a seat, any questions for Anwar about this experience?
I was wondering what was the thing, the thing is I was taking notes, so I wasn't looking as much as I could have done. I was wondering what was the thing that, the point at which you remember a shift really happening for you.
When she said that about talking about the others, thinking of me in a way that I'm competent in something, and also she enforces it that I will look at them as a source for me, not as a threat or to feel. Yeah.
And incidentally, my purpose in doing that, my intent in doing that is that just realistically, sooner or later, she's going to notice that her colleagues do know some things that she doesn't know, or can do some things that she can't do, because that's just reality. I can look at every one of you and find lots of things that you can do better than I can. So then what I wanted then was for her to have a way of responding to that comparison in a useful way as well. Yeah, ecology check and a future pace of, what to do in those situations. Now having changed her basic comparison for understanding how she's competent, now I still want to give her also a useful way of responding to the comparison that used to be a trigger for the old response. Okay, so thank you very much. Yeah. Okay.
I really feel different than growing up.
Okay, excellent. You look different. So, yeah. And when I say different, actually, you look even better, let's say, rather than different. Okay, so going over the steps of this process. First of all is, you can elicit the belief to be changed. She already had the belief, so she gave it to me, so we already kind of were a step ahead. But just as a refresher and a reminder, so you can ask, what do you want? And then get it into A equals B or A causes B form. And you can use all these questions that are, of course, in your notes on the last page of the section, as well as up here, to elicit the A and B. Or if you'd rather, than using your notes, if you'd rather just go for it, say, okay, do I have an A, do I have a B? And then just let your unconscious supply the words for how do I get the other piece? How do I get what's missing so that I have an A and a B? But do check then on a conscious level that you have an A and B limiting belief before proceeding with the process. Now in this case, we also, it's fine to focus on the comparison as well, since that's included in the repertoire. And that's what we did in this case, of course. So she had when I compare myself with my colleagues is the A, then that causes me to feel empty is the B. And is it a belief you want to change? And clearly this one was. So then we go on. It's possible to also specify the context. Is this always true? We did a bit of checking as far as is she just doing this in comparison to her colleagues, or is there something else that she's comparing herself with and feels that she compared herself with and felt at that point in time inferior to? And so it was just specifically this context. So another thing that you can do here is after we have taken care of this complex equivalence or cause effect, let me just put the arrow in there. Will you have what you want? Now, I did not ask this out loud, and it's certainly totally acceptable to ask this of the person. Another approach you can take is to try it on yourself. So a strategy that I use when I use advanced language patterns is, and other NLP as well, is I gather the information, I try it on as though I had the same limitation, as though when I compare myself to my colleagues, I get an empty feeling because I'm comparing myself with my colleagues, and I'm just looking at how they're more competent than I am. Okay? So if I try this on, okay, I understand how it works. If I do the same thing, I can feel empty too. So now, if I change this comparison, is that going to change my response? Okay, and it does. So now, next we're going to loosen the old belief using all the sleight of mouth patterns and presuppositions. They're all fair game now. Replace it with a new belief, again, using sleight of mouth and presuppositions, however they come out and however, just kind of allow it to flow. You've already spent 2.5 days doing things in a very methodical fashion, learning each piece. Now's a good time to just notice if you have this understanding of the limitation and you have an understanding, a representation of where we want to go. Now, just what happens if you let the language flow for how to move the person from here to there? Now, and then test. And by the way, what we're going for here isn't just the verbal response of, okay, now I know I'm competent. Because earlier, when I asked her, so in what ways are you already more competent than the others? She said, well, yes, I know lots of ways. But nonverbally, you could tell that she had not made the shift. So we're going not only for the verbal response, but the nonverbals as well to indicate a shift. Then, once we have replaced the old belief with the new belief, we're going to test. So now, in that moment where there was a limitation, is there anything that can possibly stop you from just having this new response? And at the point in time when I said that, there was something. So we went back and dealt with that. Okay. So, and then we got a sense of congruence. So when she stepped into the situation and tried it on the second time, she had the new response. Now, an optional future pace with contextualization. Sometimes this fits really well, and can be a really useful thing to do. Basically, it's now that you've made this change, now that you have this new response, new belief, new behavior, whatever it is, when will you still want to have the old response, even though you now have the new choice? Okay, so we're presupposing that we have the outcome, and at the same time, we're noticing, well, are there contexts where we want something different? I did kind of a variation on this with, now that you have this way of being aware of your competence, how do you want to respond differently to noticing times when your colleagues do something better than you do, in effect? There's something that they've learned before you've learned it. And at first, she wasn't quite understanding my question, and so I kind of came out with it and said what I was going for there was that it was an opportunity for learning. So I included that in my question then, and then it worked. Anwar has an awful lot to do here, because not only is she listening to what I say and allowing herself to experience change, she has this whole language translation thing that she's doing on top of all of that. So, so it's amazing. I just have a sense of wonder and awe for those of you for whom English is not your first language that are learning all of this. So now install on the timeline where and when useful, using your presuppositions and your verb forms to allow this new, more resourceful response to be fully present in all of the situations in which you want to have it. Isn't it? Okay, so let's do this in groups of 3. And in terms of time frame, we're going to have between now, it's almost 2:45. let's take a break first. So we're going to start at more like 10 till 3. Then we're going to have from there until, let's say, 20 till 5. So an hour and 50 minutes. Now, that may seem like a lot of time. However, if you want to get 3 rounds in, you'll need to be very efficient and really go for it and be very much on task, even as you're also in a playful state, of course. But be playful in an on-task way to go resourcefully and enjoyably towards the outcome. And if you have time to do only a couple of rounds, that's okay too. You don't have to stop in the middle of something just so you get all the rounds in. Okay, so let's go ahead and take a break, 10 minutes, and then we'll come back and go for it.